Hello, I'm Carly Rixum, Executive Director of the American Solar Energy Society, and I'd like to thank you for joining our monthly webinar series. The American Solar Energy Society is a 501c3 nonprofit organization that was established in 1954 and advocates for sustainable living and 100% renewable energy by sharing information, events, and resources to cultivate community and power progress. Welcome to the October webinar covering PV recycling. Before we start today's webinar, I'd like to give you all a short update on ASES programs. Our 50th annual National Solar Conference, Solar 2021, Empowering a Sustainable Future, will be taking place in Boulder, Colorado at the University of Colorado Boulder from August 3rd to 6th, 2021. The call for participation is now open. So please head to ases.org/participate2021 to learn more and submit before January 15th. The 25th annual National Solar Tour was all virtual this year and a great success. Head to nationalsolartour.org to watch all of the content from this year's tour. The latest Solar Today magazine has been released and you can read it now online as an ASES member. Log into your ASES account and then click Solar Today Archives to read it today. And join ASES for Solar Today access. ASES is currently running a membership drive and we're asking you to join, renew, or give the gift of membership to ASES today. Learn more about all of our membership options at ases.org/join. If you have questions, please email us at membership@ases.org. And you can learn more about ASES and partner events at ases.org/ASES events. Now, it's my pleasure to introduce to you to today's moderator and presenters, Tom Thompson, AJ Orban, and Sam Vanderhoof. Tom Thompson, today's moderator, is the National Director of Sales for the Solaria Corporation, an American solar technology innovator focused on high efficiency, all-black PV models for the residential market. Headquartered in Fremont, California, Solaria has one of the world's true pioneers in solar panel design. Tom has sold over 0.5 gigawatt of PV modules in his solar career, including some of the biggest and most innovative energy projects in North America. Tom is a member of ASES, NESI, and a board member through the New York Solar Energy Society. Speaker Sam Vanderhoof has served as a corporate executive at Petra Solar, SMA America, Schott Solar, Trace Engineering, Xantrex, and Kyocera Solar. Sam's career includes developing cutting-edge technology and market strategy, specializing in power inverters, on and off-grid PV, and microgrid projects, both domestically and internationally. He is CEO of Recycle PV Solar, a U.S. company engaged in the collection, reuse, and recycling of solar PV modules. And speaker AJ Orban is Vice President at We Recycle Solar, and innovating lifecycle management for the solar industry. We Recycle Solar is the dedicated single-source disposal provider for excess, damaged, and end-of-life solar equipment. AJ oversees sales and marketing and the strategic direction of the company. AJ's career is centered around promoting the circular economy, extending the useful life of devices and minimizing waste. He has a diverse background built upon electronics and metals recycling and reverse logistics. The recorded version of today's webinar and content shared with you today will be provided to you next week. Please send in any questions or comments you may have during the presentation into the Q&A section of the webinar. And we will answer all of the questions at the end of the presentations. Take it away, Tom.
Thank you very much, Carly. How is everyone today? Welcome to this really timely and innovative workshop webinar that we have. I just want to give a quick shout out right back to ASES, the American Solar Energy Society, Carly. I have attended ASES events for a good long time. My first one was in Boston in 1986. It was part of the NESI conference at that time. And The organization has been there to nurture me both personally and professionally throughout my career. It's a wonderful group to be part of. So this is an example of the kind of benefits that you get by being part of ASES. Comes to everybody free. If you're a member, good on you. And if you're not, please consider supporting this great organization. We are bringing forward this issue of photovoltaic module recycling, which is something like, as I think back on my career, recycling and solar have always kind of been in parallel, but what we're now realizing is that we've been so successful with solar that we've got now a legacy behind us of that success that we need to deal with in a sustainable way. So this in some ways is the merger of the growth of solar and the interest in recycling, bringing those two things together. With AJ, we have somebody who's been not necessarily doing solar recycling, but has been in the recycling game for a long time. So he's going to bring to us, the perspective from, doing this kind of thing. Sam, of course, a great pioneer. He'll bring us his perspective as somebody who's actually sold a lot of the panels that he's now saying, hey, I got to sign up for these. So AJ, with that, please take it away.
Sure. So I'm AJ Orban. I am the Vice President of We Recycle Solar. I'm going to give you a short presentation on our company as a whole, not necessarily the issue of solar recycling, but kind of the differentiators and whatnot. So We Recycle Solar, we are your dedicated single source disposal provider for excess, damaged, and end-of-life solar equipment. What does that mean? Essentially, that means we are not a broker of this material. We are not a company that collects the solar panels to ship them off to someone else for processing. We are a true processor of this material, breaking it down to the raw commodity so it could be further refined back to use as the commodity. So why We Recycle Solar? So We Recycle Solar, we are built upon real waste experience. The managing members of this company all have experience within the hazardous waste disposal, waste management, electronics and metals recycling, and reverse logistics industries. We have a, what's the right term? We are in the process of getting a patent for our process. We have the capability of processing all types of solar modules, so not just silicon. We process cadmium-based modules. We process gallium arsenide. We process the copper-based or SIGS panels, as well as the amorphous silicon. Basically, any kind of chemistry of modules, we would have the ability to process. And in terms of regulatory compliance and expertise, our chief compliance officer is a certified hazardous materials manager, an environmental engineer, and a fully accredited environmental auditor for several state and federal agencies. So we understand the law at the federal level as well as internationally and even individual states. So We Recycle Solar, although the name is We Recycle Solar, we're not a one-trick pony. Our primary objective is to extend the useful life of solar equipment, really taking a circular approach to what we do. Again, with our background, we've really been focused as a whole on taking in products that we can refurbish and recertify and redeploy into the global marketplace. Part of our experience prior to forming We Recycle Solar was handling consumer take-back programs for essentially the US's largest manufacturers and retailers. We worked with one retailer in specific that had about $465 million in customer returns a year, and we helped them move endless tractor trailers of material that we were refurbishing and then redeploying into the secondary market. So just a brief overview of some of the things that We Recycle Solar does. So, essentially the three most common things that people utilize this for. One is going to be the certified landfill-free disposal and responsible recycling. Again, as a true recycler, the primary benefit of our recycling program is that we eliminate your Superfund liability. So at no point will a environmental agency, whether it be a state level EPA or the federal EPA, come to you and say that you've improperly or illegally disposed of anything. The second option, which is solar value recovery or simply solar buyback, we are purchasing excess, used, and damaged modules, batteries, inverters, and other equipment. And we're primarily doing so, again, with the understanding that we're looking to refurbish and redeploy those. And then environmental consulting. So we work a lot with clients to advise on different environmental issues, whether it be chemical analysis of their solar panels to determine a hazardous or non-hazardous status, whether it's advising how to minimize their waste, whether it's coming up with programs to minimize waste. Those are some of the things that we've done with majority of our clients. And then that's that. Turn it over to Tom.
Okay. I think we're having, do we have any questions or for AJ at this point?
Yes, we do have a question from the audience. Jay Birch is asking, is there an accepted definition of lifetime of PV, specifically for large-scale PV arrays? PV cells can produce for 50 years with reduced efficiency. So it's a complex question. Commentary appreciated.
Sure. I'd actually love to answer that. So, what I often find funny about this industry is with the warranties that manufacturers give these days, assuming that the module has a 20-year warranty with an 80% efficiency at the quote-unquote end of life, if you were to get a 450-watt panel today, then in 20 years, it's still going to produce 365 watts, which is great by today's standards. But likely in 20 years, we'll have 1,000-watt panels. And so the market for a module that was 450 that now puts out 365 is essentially going to be non-existent. The way that I look at solar panels, and again, given my experience, is really no different than I look at cell phones. There's an upgrade period. And, if you're an iPhone user, there's probably a great chance you have somewhere between an iPhone 8 and maybe an iPhone 11 or that new iPhone 12. And there's a better chance you have an iPhone 4 sitting somewhere in a drawer in your home. The iPhone 4 does everything your current iPhone could do, but nobody's using it. So, I mean, again, my background's not really in solar. I think from what I've gathered, as long as you properly upkeep the panels, they're going to continue to produce electricity. But the question really is, are you going to continue to use those panels when you can replace them with something that'll put twice the power out in that same footprint?
Excellent commentary, AJ. Sam, I know we're trying to get your presentation going, but do you have any comment on the question? See, I think you're on mute.
I'm not seeing Sam here, but the next question, Gay Knupp is asking you, AJ, can we get broken modules to you? Or I'm sorry, how can we get broken modules to you?
Sure. So we operate several facilities around the U.S. Our primary processing plants, one is in New York and one is in Arizona. You can either deliver the modules to us or we can arrange for a pickup and have them transported to our facility, and we would just pass along that cost.
Excellent. And do you recycle only residential or commercial level panels only? Do you deal with industrial panels also?
Sure. So we don't have any minimums or maximums in terms of what we're dealing with. Typically, in my experience, the residential consumers that have reached out to us do not move forward given the cost involved. But we don't discriminate. We offer the service to everyone. Really, we're in the business of processing commercial and utility scale projects. We're processing thousands to tens of thousands of modules a week.
Excellent. Got a lot of questions coming here. We'll go ahead and answer or ask a few more. Joanne Brash says, I'm sorry, this is Drew Johnstone from the city of Santa Monica. He says, if a solar customer or installer asks what to do with panels they no longer need, what should we tell them? Can customers work with We Recycle Solar today?
They can. Again, there is a cost involved based on the economics of the solar panels. I wasn't sure if Sam was going to cover that in his presentation or if it would be a topic of discussion. You know, from my perspective, recycling of solar panels has always been technically an option. The real issue is the economics behind it. The average solar panel generates all of $2 in aluminum, copper, glass, lead, silicon, and silver, and that's after you spend roughly $15 to $25 in raw processing. It's a complete loss. So for that reason, you know, my company as well as Sam's company do charge a fee to process solar panels. So again, from my perspective, really no minimum or no maximum, whether it's a residential consumer, whether it's a small contractor, whether it's utility, we would accept the modules no differently. It's just at the end of the day, there is a fee to properly dispose of them.
And when will you get to serving New Mexico?
We are already serving New Mexico. Again, we do have a nationwide footprint. I'd be honest, I'm based out of our East Coast office. The majority of our clientele are really based on the West Coast, out of areas like California. New Mexico, I think, is the second state, Colorado, and Texas. So pretty much anywhere your panels are located, we can have them picked up and transported for processing.
Awesome. And David Hunter asks, what is the national distribution of solar recycling companies or programs, and do the various companies discuss and coordinate operations?
Right now, there are a handful of companies within the U.S. that claim to do solar recycling. You know, of those, how many actually process them is another question. But no, we're all independently owned and operated, so there really isn't something that we're kind of coordinating between each other.
Mm-hmm. Do you have technology separating silicon crystal and copper automatically?
We do. So as I mentioned, we have okay, I remember the term now. It's a provisional patent for our process. Essentially, the modules are dismantled, they're severed, they're shred, they undergo secondary chemical processing, and we're able to extract the metals from the glass and the silicon.
All right, a few more questions here. Bruce Hahn is asking, when you do non-landfill disposal, do you grind up old panels and recover the raw materials for reuse? How do you do that?
Sure. So I do want to point out that the term disposal is the legal term, which just covers essentially getting rid of the panel. We are strictly no landfill, with the caveat being except where required by law. Now, what that means is when it comes to a silicon-based module, again, the process is essentially dismantling it, shredding it, or as the person asking the question specified, grinding it, and then it undergoing essentially a chemical solution to separate the metals from the glass and the silicon. At that point, the metals go to metals mills and refineries where they're reformed back to their base commodity. The glass goes to a glass processor. If it is a clean glass or an inert glass, it can be reutilized in other applications. Otherwise, if there's any trace elements or contaminants in that glass, it's used for different purposes like sand at a golf course, or concrete aggregate, or tiling. The silicon will go back to a refinery to be brought back to metallurgical grade so it can be used in other semiconductor applications or PV applications. Now, again, when it comes to that little caveat of except where required by law, I would say in the case of CadTel panels, if we can cleanly separate the cadmium from the glass, which we can in the majority of instances, that cadmium goes to a manufacturer that uses it for industrial plating applications to prevent corrosion. If we are not able to cleanly separate the cadmium from the glass, then under US federal law, we are required to chemically stabilize that material and deliver it to a hazardous waste treatment facility where it sits indefinitely. But again, our business is really around recycling. We will not put our name on anything that's going to be landfill.
Fantastic. Looks like we've got Sam Vanderhoof on the line now.
We have liftoff.
Hi guys. Hey, thanks. We have some real technical difficulties on our side, so.
Well, that's what a team is all about, right? So AJ, I thank you. Really excellent fill in there. And Sam, if you can go full screen, take her away.
Can you see the slides that I
We can.
putting up?
We can. Yep.
You can?
Yep.
Oh wow. Nice.
Yes.
I gave up.
And then
Thanks.
upper left, if you hit the view button, you'll go full screen. Little further upper left. There, yeah, not quite that. Don't do that one.
Not my computer.
It's that view button. If you click the view button, I think it'll give you a full screen option. Yeah, that one.
Let's just go with this. This is good.
Let's just go with this.
Pretty slideshow.
Thanks. You can see all the computer now. Anyway, thanks for having me, guys.
The play arrow.
We've been, in the solar business for a long time, and that's our primary focus is renewables and PV. About 4 years ago, actually, we got pretty serious about looking at what was happening in the landscape of unused modules, decommissioned modules, PV, and really took it pretty serious about 2 years ago, actually opening up recycled PV solar. So we started in the PV business really about 1976, so a long time ago. There's a photograph of myself and Ron Kennedy, 1979 at our first company. Ron ended up becoming the president of Sharp Solar in the US, and myself doing manufacturing modules under Shot Solar and also a lot of inverter companies. I'm going to go through these pretty quick because we're running kind of late here, but we partnered up with a company called PV Cycle in Europe, and they are the forerunners of being able to process solar throughout Europe, recycle it, collect it, working on all the policy issues in Europe. And they have about 13 years experience doing that. And we partnered up a few years ago to try to bring that kind of ideas and those technologies here to the US. Our mission is to keep PV out of landfills. That's our goal, is to be able to do that, reuse panels where we can, and work on all the policies and different issues around solar to be able to make it more responsible and bring education to the US. Problems. I think Tom said it earlier, we all, have sold PV, have installed PV, have manufactured PV, many of us, over the years, and it's been very successful. But there is problems with what we've been doing. We've littered the universe and world with PV, and haven't really thought about what happens after we build this stuff. It doesn't last forever. So some of the problems of end of life with PV in the US, systems are going in like crazy. residential systems, every 90 seconds, a solar system is being installed. We don't have a nationwide program to deal with end-of-life solar. There is nothing right now. There's some state incentives and programs that are happening, but it's one state at a time. And you know, the fact that Europe recycles 95% of PV, in the US it's somewhere less than 10%, shows us we have a long ways to go. So again, the problem, approximately 140 to 150,000 panels are installed every day in the US. And if you look at it, you know, through the eyes of the recyclers and processors, it's measured in tons, and that's about 7 million tons a day that's being installed. And again, to put it in perspective, you know, if you look at a train, you know, running down the tracks and in any area, we're talking about, you know, about 160-ish train car pulls every single day. And that's a lot being installed. And they will have an end of life. I mean, our industry promotes long life of PV, and that is the case. In, you know, many times, you know, solar lasts for a long time. However, it does have a limited life, and that limited life we'll explore here in just a little bit. So it's growing, growing, growing. So we're really successful in putting in more PV, and it is, you know, during the lifespan that it's creating, you know, energy and electrons and kilowatt hours. We're really successful at doing that and getting better and better at it, and even, you know, competing head to head with other sources of energy, coal and nuclear and other sources of energy that now PV has gained a lot of momentum, and PV is here to stay. You can see, you know, almost anywhere you fly in a plane, you look down, most places in the US, and you see these large arrays, either on rooftops or in fields, but also it's growing rapidly on the off-grid market. We've done, you know, many, many megawatts of systems, usually smaller systems, in developing countries for water pumping in schools and villages, and a lot of rural electrification in developing nations. And solar is the prime prime source of energy in a lot of these developing nations because it's easy and it's diverse. So we're talking about, you know, today around 65 gigawatts already installed in the US. And if you go back and look at it in, you know, in tons or pounds, you know, 5 million tons of solar panels are installed. And the concern is, you know, the problem is that we sell them as kind of having a, you know, 25-year, or I even hear 30-year, 40-year, 50-year lifespans for these modules. And where it is possible to have that happen, there's a lot of factors that shorten that life. So some of the issues that we see, we did some studies and we found that just in California alone, we were looking at, you know, where does some of the damage come from panels on the installation part? And our quick study showed that about 2,000 panels per month in California alone are damaged just in the transportation from not from the manufacturer, from the distributor to the roof of residences and commercial residences, not the big farms, are damaged just in that transportation and attempted installation process. So if you look at that, you know, just that one thing alone is 2,000 solar panels a month. Where are they going after they're damaged? We're seeing a lot of manufacturing defects, recall issues, diode issues, and then weather is a giant problem. About half the problems we're seeing out there is caused by windstorms, trees falling on panels, ice storms, hailstorms, tornadoes, you name it. And that's all over the US. Repowering is another big issue that I think OJ said it earlier, that as efficiency begins to improve in solar panels, sometimes it's a choice to pull off old panels and put newer ones on because you get more power per square foot. weather. If you look at this hailstone here that's in this person's hand, hailstorm tests for UL done in solar modules are usually about a golf ball size test. That's what solar panels have to pass in order to get through UL. Well, if we start seeing what's happening in the weather and climate change issues that we're seeing today, hailstorms are much larger than 1 inch. And we're also seeing increased weather, hurricanes, tornadoes, and things like that that are really damaging a lot more panels than we ever thought would happen. Here's a quick chart from Kelly Pickerel that she did, and she spent a lot of time looking at the damage of panels throughout just North America alone. And you can see the large portion is weather related, and also fire. Look in California, we've had tremendous fire issues this year, and a lot of solar panels were destroyed during those panels, either partially or completely. Here's some other big reasons that we're seeing decommissioned solar. That we think of solar lasting for 25 years. It's how it's sold usually, or 25 or 30 or 40 or 50 years. But the reality, what we're really seeing, boots on the ground, about 7 to 12 years in decommissioning. We're seeing that's when there's a good chance solar panels will be pulled off, because there's some events during those times. Part of it is the tax credit they originally sold under has been realized, and it's time to relook at that system, because it probably needs some work. It probably needs to have the inverters upgraded, the roof re-roofed, a bunch of things like that. So a lot of times it's worth, economically, to pull those panels down, re-roof, put a new inverter on, and throw new modules back up. And then you get a new tax credit. So we're seeing a lot of that happen, is this decommissioning, mainly for economic reasons. Also, being able to do O&M on these systems, when that's done, and usually around year 10, something breaks and has to be fixed. And after a few of those O&M requested patches, usually, and then patch after patch, it gets expensive, and a lot of times the whole system is then decommissioned and redone with newer modules. So one of the big issues that we all face at the end of life for solar panels is, what do we, what does it cost? What are we dealing with? And usually, when we get the calls, the inquiries is that come pick these up. They have a value. How much do you pay us for them? But the reality is that it does cost to actually recycle. Now, repurposing does cost as well, but repurposing, there is some value left in the panel, so it covers that. But the recycling cost, it's because of the logistics, the transportation, the handling, the equipment to do it. Solar panels are cost $15 to $45, depending on where they are and what they are, to process a panel in the U.S. Because we believe it's because there's no policies, overall policies in the U.S. So what happens is that cost to do that is borne to the last entity that owns these panels, and that's not usually the manufacturer. It's not usually system operators. A lot of times it's usually whoever, a homeowner or a system operator that's owned these for some time now bears the cost of decommissioning them. In contrast, Europe, because they have a program, and this is what we're working closely with our European partners to try to bring some of those technologies and policies here to the US. They have that process down to about 90 cents upfront cost per panel that's charged usually to the manufacturers to do all of the collection and processing and recycling. And that pays for the process. 90 cents is a real doable cost. But in the US, because we're not there yet, we're paying these high costs that usually these high costs, the biggest problem is that they're not understood well enough up front So it's a big surprise when systems do need to be decommissioned for some reason, especially if they have to be recycled, and that cost is a big surprise, especially to insurance companies. Just an example that we're seeing, and all of us have bought car tires and batteries and electronics and things like that, that in most states automatically charge some kind of core fee, recycling fee to process those materials downstream. And we're used to it usually in the US. I mean, when you have car tires put on, there's a line item on your bill when you go to pay it, but you don't really even question it. For solar, that doesn't exist today. There are some regulations coming into play in Washington State, and that's the first state to really have any kind of program. But in order for this to be successful, to get the volume handled properly throughout the US, we need to have better policies and regulations. I've been doing this for a long time. I've been installing manufacturers for 40 years, and I never thought I'd see the day that there would be so much either broken or decommissioned, or solar panels that need new homes. And also, I'm kind of surprised about a little bit that it's not understood well enough throughout the US, because it came on so fast. Where does all this stuff go? It is coming down. This year we're estimating about 1 gigawatt of solar panels is being decommissioned. So where is it going after it's being decommissioned? And who's responsible for all of it? If you look at this list of companies, and some of these companies I've either started or worked for, or had a lot of influence on these companies, and most of them are gone now. And those panels and components that were built and manufactured by these companies are now failing. A lot of them are years and years old, and those companies are no longer there to pick up the mess. This is from IRENA report that was done a few years ago, and it's an older report already. Even though it's only about 4 years old, it's old about what the data is and how it could be. Actually, it's much worse than what this chart is actually showing. Some of the early losses, but if you look at the sheer numbers of PV that's coming down the pike, there's a lot of modules that can be reused, but there's also a lot of modules that need to be recycled, and there's a cost associated with this. And as an industry in the US, the process of what to do with these panels and where to take them and how to easily process them, and also the cost and who bears that cost, is still a real problem in the US. So what we're seeing today, because only about 10% is recycled, the rest of it is finding its way to all sorts of places. I mean, as much of it that can be reused as possible is the best way. We work with donating modules to Native American groups and overseas to villages and schools and things like that. We do our part as much as we can. It does cost. It's not free to transport a panel, and it's not free to test that panel and get it out. And it competes with the lower cost of PV today. I mean, you can easily buy a solar panel at 50 cents a watt. So if you can do that for a brand new panel with warranty, what is a used panel worth? And it costs the same amount to transport that panel, whether it's new or used. So there's a lot of pressure on the cost and the prices of these panels and where they can go and how they can be delivered. And in recycling costs as well. The machines are expensive, and the infrastructure to handle those PV panels and recycling is expensive. But we see it. It's growing. We see the growing problems as well. And a lot of times the solar industry is in denial of the damage that's happening out there. There are fires, there's There's windstorms. There are new technologies, floating panels that are still experimental. And we're seeing a lot of damage in that. Jumping into what's in these panels. By and large, it depends on the technology, whether it's thin film or crystalline technologies. There are materials that can be reused. A big portion of that is glass, and that's makes up for 60 to 65% of the total weight. The problem with all of this is, as we manufactured panels, and a lot of us spent many years developing the manufacturing process of making a panel, we tried to make it last for as long as we can. Our goal is to try to make these things last for 25 years. The reality of it, we were never really thinking, how would we get rid of these panels at the end of their lives? It just wasn't really in the game plan at the time. We were in denial, thinking that these will last kind of forever. But the reality is, to pull these panels apart, to recycle them technologically, is really, really difficult. We can pull it apart, but to be able to efficiently separate these materials in a way that they're pure enough that they can have some value back on the market is really the challenge. Being able to pull these materials out and resell them is the goal of all recyclers, and it has to do with the commodities market, what these materials are worth, how clean they are, and where we can sell them. Here's kind of a breakdown of some of the possible values of this equipment, and these are prices per ton. But remember, if you look at thin glass here, $60 to $80 per ton. Well, if you look at a ton of solar panels, glass, it has to be, first of all, super, super clean. And if you have 1 ton of it, that's about what will fit on a pallet, one shipping pallet. Well, if you try to ship that pallet anywhere in the US, it usually would cost you, closer to $100 just to ship that glass. And if you only get $60 to $80 out of it, you're at a loss just trying to move that glass around, the logistics. So the commodities aren't worth as much as it would seem. The solutions, some of the solutions, I'll go through some of those, is, be able to take the panels that are undamaged, be able to test them, and then resell or donate those. And that ends up being a profit center. And it all depends on what they are and where they're coming from, and how long they've been out in the field, and all that, what the value is. Repairing, refurbishing these panels takes quite a bit of time and takes effort. It's not free, and the expertise to do it is not widespread. What we're seeing is a lot of these broken panels are shipped to developing countries. They're unaware consumers of these panels in Mexico and Haiti and other places, Colombia. We're seeing them show up all different places, these broken glass panels. And these groups don't have the wherewithal to fix these panels right. So what they end up is in their landfills or their end of dirt roads. So, being able to deal with our problems here in the US before they get shipped out of our country is really important. And then those recycling processes, as we develop those processes do exist here in the world, especially in Europe, and some of it here in the US. And developing those processes that are so less costly is the goal of all the recyclers today. Main thing is, don't let panels go someplace where they shouldn't be. And we're seeing them in a lot of places. And it's our goal is, don't let panels find themselves in wasteful situations, because a lot of them can be reused. We support, and we've done for many, many years, water pumping in Africa, Latin America, Asia, where these panels can be reused for either humanitarian projects, water pumping, clinics, schools, hospitals. They have a lot of second life value. Here's this is part of the program they have in Europe, and it works. We've done before about 90 cents per panel cost to recycle. It's because the whole infrastructure is there and working. The policies are there. The solar industry supports it. The government supports it, and the regulations are there to push the issue. And it's a very successful program. And that kind of program, because it exists and it's been in existence for enough years, that that kind of program, that type of program, even though it's different here, could work here. The reliability is a big issue with solar. We're seeing a lot more damage in PV panels than we ever imagined before. Especially myself being a manufacturer at one time. The way panels were built 25 years ago is really different than today. And those panels that are built 25 years ago, and we still have a lot of them around that I even use myself today, they were built under much better standards than today. And most of them were built in the US or Germany. Nowadays, they're built in Asia with all sorts of different compliance regulations and testing. They're supposed to be well made, but we're seeing so many failures. And if you look at this DuPont testing about backskin failures, they're seeing backskin failures around year 6, and year 6 is not 25 years. So we're seeing early failures, and we're using the data from panels that were built 20 or 25 years ago. We're not using data that is from panels built in recent years. All of us need to do something. This is a big issue, and we're trying to bring some visibility to this issue. We started this business not as a profit business, but to be able to get the structure in the US to clean up some of the messes, and some of the messes that I helped create along with friends of mine. We manufactured and built millions and millions of panels. Now they're out there. Now it's time for them to come back. So being able to be responsible, because today in the US, the program to recycle or reuse, that whole part of that is a volunteer program. We all have to volunteer to do it. It's not a profit center. Being able to work on policies is critical to make sure the laws are in place to make this happen. Because if we don't, solar will get a black eye. So let's all get involved, try to make this problem greener and cleaner, and sustainable. And remember, the problem is with us right now. We go to these conferences, we talk to a lot of folks, and the response, even for people that have been in the business for a long time, say, oh, we're going to have to deal with this in a couple, 25 years, 10 years, 15 years, 30 years. I keep hearing those long out numbers. When we understand a gigawatt's being decommissioned this year, a gigawatt's a lot of panels. And how do we deal with that kind of volume? So we're here. We're in business to recycle. Our passion is to do the right thing, make solar green, keep it green, and bring awareness to the issues that our industry faces. Thank you.
Sam, great job. I'm glad we solved the technology hurdle to get you logged in here. Carly, are there any questions that popped up in the course of Sam's presentation?
Yeah, we do have quite a few questions. Sam Hall asks, what is the amount of solar PV coming off rooftops around the country needing to be recycled? And what kind of volume are you guys handling? Sam, I believe you said it was 1 gigawatt. Is that per year?
That's the estimate, right, is this year. Now, remember, it's a cumulative over the years. So this year, about 1 gigawatt is estimated from the IRENA report to be decommissioned this year. So it's a lot of modules. Does that answer the question, you think?
Yeah. And what kind of volume are you and AJ handling?
I'm not allowed to say that. My partners will shoot me.
I will comfortably say that we are processing thousands to tens of thousands of panels on a weekly basis. I think the IRENA report that Sam referenced in this presentation, if I recall, the most recent one states that they assume in 2020 there will be about, I think it was 40 tons that was going to be qualified for recycling. And I can tell you we have one client alone that's recycling close to 300,000 panels in the next X period of months, and it's roughly like 70 tons. So, we're in the business of primarily doing utility scale projects. So it's not uncommon for us to see something that's 10,000, 50,000 panels at a time.
The numbers are much, much higher than we had ever thought. And again, some of the things I shared, maybe that shows you the reasons for that. They're not the reasons we had thought would happen. We didn't know that, because of the ITC tax credit going down, that would increase decommissioning of panels, but it's happening.
Okay. And Sam, you can stop sharing your screen now. Ron Celentano asks, has We Recycle Solar ever testified at state hearings regarding pending or informational solar recycling legislation?
So we haven't really gotten involved on the policy end when it comes to recycling. Again, coming from the electronics recycling industry, everything that we're seeing now in solar already happened 20 years ago in the electronics recycling industry. I think from my perspective, there's a pretty grim outlook on the responsible management of solar panels over the coming decade, based on what's happened in the electronics industry with things like cathode ray tube televisions. We typically don't get involved in the policy end of things. In terms of testifying for other purposes, certainly. We provided expert testimony for permitting agencies to advise on the status of whether a panel is hazardous or not hazardous based on chemical analysis. But again, we don't typically get too involved in the policy. For us, it's not a heavy focus.
We're kind of the opposite. We spend tremendous amount of time on policy all over the U.S. And it's difficult because we got 50 different states we have to deal with. So we spend a lot of time. We spent a year and a half dedicated time in Washington State to work on the regulations there. And it's the first successful one, and we got most of what we wanted in that policy there. But we're working on policies in Arizona, New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, Wisconsin, and other places that we're seeing the problem creep up, and the policy makers are seeing the problem without a solution, and they want to make sure that the hot potato of decommissioned panels doesn't fall on the state level. They want somebody to take responsibility for it. So I think we're going to see more of it in the next couple of years.
And then Robert Nelman asked, what is the toxic outgassing of your plants?
I'm not sure that I understand the question. I'm not the environmental guy on my team, but I would say that in terms of our plants, everything we do is at or above board, fully permitted. So I know in Arizona, we have the permitting with the ADEQ there. I don't think that there is a requirement based on our process for that, but again, I'm not the compliance member of the team.
Okay, for us, it's we're changing processes right in the middle of that process. We've done all the compliance in the past. Our original recycling plant was in Tucson, Arizona, and we're making a lot of changes to that right now, and moving to some new sites and changing the process totally. And so the process is actually the newer processes that we're using are totally benign. No chemical involved in the first part anyway.
And Kaiba White asks about costs. Of course, there's the transportation costs. Are there other costs? What are the other costs?
into recycling and refurbishing, I mean, it really depends. Just to explain, so as panels come in, let's just say that a truckload of panels come in. They're first checked for broken glass, broken diodes. The panels that look like they're good quality can be reused. There's no damage, no physical or electrical damage. They go into pile A, and those can be resold and resent back into the market, usually off-grid market. And the next pile needs work. Frames are dented, back sheets need to be fixed, wires need to be fixed. Those can also be put back in the market, but with the caveat that they have been repaired. So usually in smaller systems, Africa, places like that, to have a limited volume. The last one now with recycling is a cost, and that is the cost that any recycler that handles them, and that cost varies on the technology and the type of panel. But as was discussed earlier, the recovered materials has not a lot of value, and the equipment to do it costs millions and millions of dollars. And in order to make these machines effective, cost effective, you've got to keep them running. You got to keep them running many hours per day, 24 hours if possible, and you have to have the volume to do that. And in the U.S. right now, to get the volume in one place is a challenge. Transportation parts of it are challenging, but the machines themselves, individual machines, are more than $1.5 million a piece per machine, and keeping that running is really part of what we need to do.
And how much do you charge?
Is this between friends? It again depends on the volume and what they are, and do they have a resale value. Many times some of the newer panels that are coming off that aren't damaged, they have a value, anywhere from a nickel a watt to maybe 15 to 16, 17 cents per watt that we'd purchase them for. So if they're not reusable, they're not fixable, and if they go back and if they're just going to be recycled, that price again depends on what they are and where they're at. Somewhere between $15 and $20 is typically what we charge per panel.
I'll go with that number. Yeah, we don't publicly disclose pricing. Pricing to be based around various factors. It could be based around, what the modules are. Are they silicon? Are they cadmium? If they're cadmium, are they intact? Are they cracked and broken? Because if the modules are cracked and broken, they're potentially leaching out hazardous cadmium. They're going to need to be packaged and managed in a different fashion and transported as a hazardous waste. There's a lot of regulatory complexities around it, not so simple and straightforward. And of course, as Sam mentioned, if the modules are intact, good quality, we purchased them. We purchased them for, I don't want to even throw out a figure, but it ranges.
So, there's something that he brought up that I think is important to understand. We're in this business, a lot of us, for environmental reasons. We always say that solar is green and clean producing power, but there are heavy metals in these panels, and if they're not processed properly, the cadmium panels, and even in crystalline panels, the lead solder in between the cells and the junction boxes can cause a health problem if they're not properly handled, especially if they're leaching into groundwater. So it's as an industry, we need to kind of pick things up, look at it, and do the right thing to get these panels end of life in the right process. Otherwise, it will be a black eye for the industry. And I've been doing this too long. I want to make sure that these panels that are out there, that they get into the proper waste stream and process handled in the proper way. And it costs, not free, if they're broken panels. And I understand we've visited many clients, and there are piles and piles and piles and warehouses of panels all over the U.S. I would imagine almost every distributor and dealer has them stacked up because they don't know what to do with them, and they didn't assign a cost to them. So they're sitting in the back of the warehouse piling up because they don't want to pay for them. And that has to be, we have to move forward.
Carly, I see we're at the top of the hour. I don't know if you want to extend it or if we have more questions. If
Yeah, we
AJ
do
and
have quite a few more questions, so we're going to keep going for a few more minutes here. David Hunter asked, would it be a good idea to join with other PV recycling companies to lobby aggressively for a national policy like that in Europe?
I mean, I don't see why it would hurt. But from my perspective, coming from the electronics recycling industry, don't quote me on the figure because it's off the top of my head. But I believe currently out of 50 US states, there's roughly 23 or 26 states with mandated landfill bans on electronics. New York, New Jersey, Connecticut, California. Now, out of those states that have the mandated landfill bans, only California was progressive enough to institute a consumer electronics waste tax, which taxes you at the time of purchase, puts that money in a fund, and subsidizes the disposal later on. Everywhere else, recycling is pretty much on your own. And so I really don't foresee, as a whole, the US enacting anything in the way that Europe has at this point in time.
To put it in perspective, it is a volunteer program, mostly throughout the US. You can take a solar module, 250 watt size, and you can take it to the local landfill in most states, and it costs you about 70 cents to dump that. Compare that to about, $15 to $20 to recycle it, and that's the choice. That's the choice we're facing with today.
Yeah, I'd like to actually add to what Sam said there. I think the one misconception is about the legal ability to landfill a solar panel. So just so everyone is clear, solar modules are governed federally as a hazardous waste. They are considered to be hazardous at the time they are removed from service and will no longer be reused. If they have been damaged in any way, if you have slated them for disposal or deemed them a waste, or until you have done a chemical analysis necessary to prove they are that they are essentially non-hazardous. What I could tell you is that we actually do the chemical analysis of every module we receive at our facilities that we have not yet tested. We primarily do so for the benefit of our clientele, so we can advise them as to when they are sitting on what would be considered large volumes of hazardous waste, which has heavy repercussions from a regulatory standpoint. And a little more than 2/3 of all modules federally are hazardous for elevated levels of lead and silver content. That would effectively preclude you from landfilling the panel. That's not to say that your local dump may not accept the panel. If they do, they are either unaware that they should not be, or they are unscrupulous. It's either or. Now, currently in California, the Cal EPA and the Cal DTSC have deemed solar panels to be a hazardous waste. The recyclers, the scrap yards, the landfills there know that they are not capable of taking that material. In order to prove that a module is non-hazardous in the state of California, it would require additional testing. Again, we do that additional testing for the modules we receive, and of those same modules, 9 out of 10 are generally hazardous for the additional inclusion of copper or zinc. That said, and I know this is something that many have discussed, likely over the next year, the DTSC in California will move the classification from hazardous to a universal waste, which will allow it to be managed in a easier fashion, a little less stringent. But again, from the perspective of the current legal landscape, it is essentially illegal to dump a solar panel.
Well said. Just one thing I'll add to that you missed, I think, that the industry doesn't quite understand. is that right now it's typically a 30-day limitation for storing these panels. 30 days, that's not long. So when these are collected, you have a pretty short time frame to do something with them. And your choices for doing something with them isn't real clear to a lot of, especially installers and distributors of modules. So it's a good idea to get your folks together and try to decide what you're going to do with these and have a policy, within your own company.
Right. So I'm going to agree with Sam there. That term is speculative accumulation. So under the U.S. law, as well as the varying state laws, for any hazardous waste, whether it's a solar panel, whether it's a battery, whether it's aerosol cans, paint thinners, you have a limited time frame dependent upon what you have and the volume that you have to legally dispose of those before the essentially before the EPA begins to fine you heavily.
I hear the fines are real reasonable too.
Cheaper than recycling.
All right, we'll just do a couple more questions here. Are the recycled materials used for new panels? If so, who does this?
I would say yes, but the materials really utilized for any purpose. At least in terms of our process, we break them down to the raw materials, and they go to refinery to be brought back to whatever the base commodity is. So like the aluminum from the frame of the solar panel may be used for other solar panels, and again, aluminum framing, or it might go to siding for your house, or cars or soda cans. It's essentially broken down to the raw commodity that can be used for pretty much any application.
We spend a lot of time in looking at that downstream value and where can it go, and we're constantly looking for new places for that value stream. For instance, one of them, because glass is such a big part of that, and depending on how clean you can get the glass, but one of the places that can go into is remaking glass or remaking or being used into fiberglass insulation for home installation. So that's a good market. It has a pretty high value. So being able to get it into those waste or those new manufacturing streams is really important.
Okay, so Sam Hall asks, seems like we're all hearing that recycling in general has become a shell of the promise that was out there a few years ago, largely due to China telling the world to keep your trash. And today you're all saying that the economics of PV recycling in particular are very difficult. How can this industry survive if it costs $15 to $45 per module to handle EOL, but the raw materials or resale are pennies per watt? Presume the only hope is government regulation or market making. What is the future realistically?
Wow.
I think that is I appreciate that question. And again, from my perspective, it is a very grim outlook for an industry. Again, my background really being in the recycling and waste management side of things and not necessarily in solar. So I appreciate the challenges that they've kind of laid out there. And really, yeah, I think it's going to come down to personal accountability in terms of doing the right thing. And then I would say the government regulation end of things. But in my personal view, again, I've kind of seen where that goes and how it's been inefficient at times. But again, Sam has a different perspective and a background, so he might. I'm sure he'll probably disagree with my take on it.
Not totally, but I mean, we've been doing PV. We're PV guys. We're not waste management guys. We've learned the waste management and recycling ways, but we're pure PV guys for 40 years now, so we understand that part of the market. It is. We feel like it was tried in Europe. A volunteer program just doesn't work. Just doesn't work. It's got to be regulated in a way that makes sense. And it's got to be regulated in a way that the collective amounts and the policies are set up so that it supports the recycling. And we're not only seeing it from PV, we're seeing it, bottles and cans and, all the trash that China was taking, that whole industry has fallen apart. It just doesn't work. It has to be re-looked at. But to put it in perspective a little bit, we spent a lot of time on this, and we believe that in the US today, if there was a $3 per panel, and it depends on the size of the panel, all that, it could be a little more complicated, but about $3 per panel for a 300-watt panel would pay for all the infrastructure necessary to collect and recycle PV in the US. It's not a big burden on the industry to do that, but it's really difficult to get that through in policy. So think about it, penny a watt, basically, to solve this problem. But we all have to do it, and it's got to be as a collective push to make it happen. You can't do it just per city. It's got to be in a much bigger way.
So Sam, I just want to jump in there and say, solar is the lowest cost energy source available in the world today. That race is over, and yay, we won. We've got power purchase agreements that are sub 5 cents a kilowatt hour. This is about economics. Is there not a way for these bigger PPAs to? I mean, it's going to take policy, of course, but is there not a way to finance this through some of these large PPAs that we're driving towards today? Because putting it on the back of a residential homeowner, that's a one. Granted, residential's a gigawatt scale market, but what's really driving this equation, I think, is the utility scale applications. And is there a pathway into that to finance this?
Okay, it's two-edged sword. I think residential and commercial and utility all fall in the category. And again, for
Sure.
$3 panel, it could be solved. So it's not a big nut if it can be done. Even a utility scale project. I mean, one of the things, the pressure's coming on from the insurance companies that are insuring these big projects. I mean, there's projects now that have had $70 million payouts from the insurance companies for damaged panels by weather.
Right.
That's a lot of money. The insurance companies are really looking at what's going on. So maybe the insurance companies are going to raise their rates. That's a real possibility.
The other thing I just want to insert here is that these bigger projects are being underwritten by the big banks, and the big banks are increasingly focused on ESG as part of their corporate responsibilities, environmental, social, and governance. It seems like if we can get the big banks on board with the value that this would bring to society, that may also be a pathway for pursuit, worthy of pursuit.
Yep, makes sense. It's kind of the carrot and the stick problem. Here's the other issue that we've been facing a lot lately, and we talked about it earlier. Hazardous material. These solar panels, whatever you think, they are considered hazardous material. Okay, they are. They're classified as hazardous material. They're broken and they're pulled down. They're sitting on the ground. They're not going to be reused. They're hazardous material. So who bears that cost and responsibility? The buck is always passed. So there's today some issues going on with residents that when these systems are pulled down, remember, a lot of these systems now are hitting 20 years old. They're coming down, they hit the ground. Homeowners can't get anybody to take them away. The landfill guys won't deal with them. The solar guys won't deal with them. The landfills, say go away. The guys that sold these panels to the homeowners or the commercial projects are usually out of business or sold their business. So the buck gets passed. The problem is these are hazardous materials. And I think that litigation for this is coming. I can see it. I can just see it. In California, we just celebrated 1 million solar roofs in California, 1 million. And if those 1 million roofs are really hazardous material when they come down and nobody's dealing with it, we've got a problem. So I think that's what worries me is that, as an industry, as a solar industry, we don't start stepping up and work on this issue before there's class action suits, maybe. I don't know. We deal with, lately, it seems like a lot of realtors that are selling houses that are having to re-roof the houses before they sell, and the panels come down on the ground, and then now what do they do with them? you know, and some people just throw their hands up and, you know, put the panels in their backyard, but you can only do that for so long. I mean, it's, I think the message to really look at for all of us is the problem's not in 25 years. The problem is here now. And as we start to deal with it and have solutions for it, and we have the solutions, we have the processes down, we have the technologies down, we have the people to do it. We just have to have the will to do it, make it happen.
Carly, I think this is a perfect spot to wrap up. I really appreciate ASES bringing this to the fore, having somebody like AJ who's been dealing with this on a million-ton basis outside of the solar industry, and Sam bringing both the responsibility and the history of being involved in this industry. I do, Carly, want to shout out to the New York Solar Energy Society and for everybody on the call to not only join ASES, but also to support your local ASES chapter. The work that you guys are doing is just really awesome, and this is just another example of it in action.
Great. Thank you, Tom, and thank you, AJ, for joining us.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sam, and thanks to all the viewers out there. We appreciate your support here at the American Solar Energy Society, and I would say that recycling of solar panels is one of the loudest critiques that our industry hears. And so it's good to have you guys on here to talk about this and talk about the progress that we're making to ensure that solar energy is truly renewable. So thanks everyone for joining. Have a great week. Stay safe out there.
Thanks, guys.